Back in March, I built this bandsaw and I wrote about it on my website, and a lot of people were very enthusiastic about it, and I got a lot of queries for plans for this bandsaw. But I didn't really want to give plans for this bandsaw because it was more of an experiment. So instead I came up with this bandsaw, which I very carefully designed and incorporates a lot of stuff I learned from the other bandsaw. So in this video I'll go through and show you what this bandsaw is all about. I was careful with the design of this bandsaw to make sure that it could be built out of very commonly available materials. In fact, the bandsaw uses very little hardwood. The whole frame is laminated together out of boards that are just spruce. This makes for a very stiff frame, and it makes the bandsaw very light and fairly easy to build. What really gives this homemade bandsaw its rigidity is this laminated wood beam frame. Laminated together out of individual boards, the whole thing only weighs about 30 pounds, but it's stiffer than a cast iron frame. I'll show the stiffness of this frame by hanging my whole weight off of here and measuring how much the blade guide drops with this dowel indicator. Only about maybe 32 thou of a drop here. For comparison, let's measure how much my 14-inch bandsaw deflects when I hang my weight off of it. And I get about 60 thou worth of deflection. So this bandsaw is only half as stiff as my wooden framed one. So how can this be? Isn't iron supposed to be stiffer? Well, just have a comparison here. So this is the frame for my cast iron bandsaw. It's really not that big and it's hollow. Whereas here is the frame for my wooden bandsaw. It's much bigger and it's solid. So to make your stiffer frame out of wood than iron, you just have to use a lot more wood. The biggest source of vibration for machines running with induction motors and V-belts is that the motor itself tends to move around because the belt is kind of running inconsistently, and as this big heavy motor moves around, that shakes up the whole saw. So on my 14-inch bandsaw, I jammed some blocks of wood in here, which really keeps the motor from moving around a lot less, but it's still not ideal. So on my homemade bandsaw, I solved this problem much better because I just took the whole frame and I extended it down here. So this leg is part of the frame, and then this is part of the frame as well, and the motor bolts directly onto here, and that means this puppy just isn't going to move. Even if the V-belt has some vibration issues, it's not going to shake the motor, and so by not moving this heavy weight around, you really cut down on the vibrations. This bandsaw actually runs super smooth and super quiet. So let me turn it on and you can hear the noise it makes. And I've actually balanced a coin here on the table and you can see it doesn't move. And how much does it take to knock over this coin? Well, let me show you. Just a slight tap. And the whole bandsaw, it's not even bolted to the floor. It's actually just on a stand with wheels on it. So it's not like it's getting any stability from the floor. It's just that well balanced. A big source of vibration for a bandsaw can also be the wheels. So I was very careful to make these wheels run really, really true. I made the wheels just by cutting them out a circle out of some very cheap plywood that I actually picked up off the curb. And then I trued the wheels by spinning them and essentially using a chisel on them like they were a lathe. So I used a temporary pulley that I just screwed to my wheels and drove that with a V-belt, and I was able to true the edges of the wheels so that they ran perfectly accurately with the bearings where they were, so I didn't have to worry about how accurately my bearings were placed because I was actually running it with the bearings where they were. The tires for a bandsaw can be quite expensive, and I didn't want this homemade bandsaw to need a $60 pair of tires. So instead I used just a simple small bicycle inner tube, which is a bit smaller than the rim of my wheel, and I stretched it over the edge. And that works as a tire. Now you'd say, hey, that couldn't possibly last and it's just not going to work. But surprisingly, I did that on my other bandsaw and I have not had any problems with it whatsoever. And if these do eventually wear out, and so far there's no signs of wear on either of my bandsaw, well, $5 we'll get you a new tire. So it's really not very expensive. I balanced the wheels for my bandsaw using these little wee bearings that came out of roller blades, so they actually cost me nothing. And I just put 2 of these on a screwdriver, and I put my big bearing on top of that. So the little bearings turn much more easily than my main bearings. And then it's just a matter of letting it go and spinning it and seeing if it tends to settle towards one spot or another. This wheel is very well balanced, so it hardly moves, although you can still see there's a tiny bit of misbalance. It seems to be maybe a tiny bit heavier here, but it's not worth doing anything about. It's balanced enough. I came up with this really cool ratcheting tensioning mechanism on my other bandsaw. But to make this one much easier to build, I just put a crank in place of a knob, so it works kind of similar to other bandsaws, but you can tension it pretty quick. So right now, this blade has got no tension on it, and let's just tension that. And we have a little bit of tension, and now we have a lot of tension. So it just takes a few turns of the crank to put the tension fully on or fully off. The cutout for the insert on my saw is just rectangular. The nice thing about that is, to make a zero clearance insert, all I have to do is take a piece of plywood and slide it in place while the saw is running. With a 3/16 inch blade in my bandsaw, I can use it to do some very intricate work. The blades that this saw uses are actually 105 inches in length. That's the same inch as is used by a 14-inch bandsaw with a riser block. So these blades are actually really easy to get because 14-inch bandsaws with riser blocks are fairly common. So to get a blade, all you have to do is just walk into a hardware store with a good selection and you can buy it at the right length right off the shelf. Now to get the 3/4 inch blade in here, to get it in behind this guard here, I have to take this block off. And I'm going to move the guides back just to make sure it'll go in. And let's put that in. Okay, good. Now I can adjust my guides. It seems to be tracking okay. The upper blade guide on this saw will normally raise to about 8.5 inches or about 21 centimeters, but it can be raised even further if I just take this block that clamps the guide bar in place and I move it into the upper hole, in the upper position, and now it doesn't interfere so much with the guide itself. And now let's bring this all the way up. And we've got about 10 inches of resaw capacity, about 25 centimeters. I'm only using a scrounged old 1/2 horsepower motor on this bandsaw, but even with this little motor, I was able to resaw 7 inches of maple, or about 18 centimeters. All I have to do is make sure the blade is sharp and go a bit slower. This bandsaw has a passive dust collection system. So all the sawdust, as it comes out underneath the table, is contained by this shroud that fits around the bottom blade guides. And it goes through the enclosure and comes out a big hole on the bottom of the enclosure. And I just catch it in a box that I put underneath the bandsaw. Now if I want to tilt the table, I do need to remove this shroud here. And here you can see the lower blade guides and my homemade wooden trunnions. So let's loosen that up a bit, and there you can see the table tilted. So it does tilt the full 45 degrees, so it can do angle cuts just like other saws. With all the capabilities of the 16-inch bandsaw, it's still really cheap to build, and it's really light because it's made out of wood. It only weighs just under 100 pounds, so it's still light enough that I can actually pick it up without any sort of assistance. Let me demonstrate. Now you might be asking, where can I get a bandsaw like that? But unfortunately it's a shop-built bandsaw and you can't buy it in the store. But you can build it because I've drawn a very comprehensive set of plans for this bandsaw. One of the things included with the plans is this one-to-one template of the frame, which will allow you to make sure that all the pieces for the frame fit together just right and that the frame has got the right shape, which is really the most important thing for this bandsaw. The template for the whole frame actually comes as several pages that you print out. You can print those on 8.5 by 11 or A4s, or you can double them up straight on 11 by 17 or A3s, and then you just glue them together. There's a diagonal grid on all the pages, which makes it very easy to line up all the pages super accurately. The bandsaw plans include over 40 drawings showing every detail of how the bandsaw goes together. There's also some very detailed building instructions, including over 70 photographs showing the construction of the bandsaw and what the bandsaw looks like once it's done. So I hope you enjoyed this video on this bandsaw. As you can see, a shop-built bandsaw doesn't have to be a compromise. I hope it encourages you to build your own bandsaw, and if you do build your own bandsaw, consider buying the plans for this one. There's an awful lot of details in the plans, and there's drawings for everything, so it'll really speed up the process. And the plans for this bandsaw actually cost less than just one bandsaw blade, so what have you got to lose?